It's a very exciting day for the tens of Augmentation of Ochre players this season, and the thousands of Arms warriors worldwide. Blizzard dropped another massive wave of PvP tuning, and we're here to break it down. And to make sure you hit your goals this season, Skill-Capped has everything you need in one place. Whatever's holding you back, there's a course that fixes it. Whatever you main, there's courses built for your exact spec, your openers, your burst, and a playbook filled with advanced tips you can't find anywhere else. Getting destroyed by the meta, learn to read every enemy buff and counter, every melee caster and healer in the game. Choking in your solo shuffle lobbies, there's a dedicated course for melee casters and healers. And if you need to master the essentials like positioning, we fix that too, with guides for every role. But that's just the start. With a single click, you transform your entire UI into the #1 setup in the game. Every must-have add-on the top players abuse installed instantly. And Arena Coach, it's your personal 24/7 high-rated mentor, automatically recording every game and handing you a detailed report of the exact mistakes secretly destroying your rating. So if you're serious about climbing this season, this is exactly what you're looking for. There's a reason over 500,000 players have trusted Skill-Capped for 10 years, with courses rated 5 stars across the board. Unlock all of it for as little as $7.99 a month, completely risk-free, because if you don't climb at least 400 rating, you get every penny back, no questions asked. Just use the discount link below. For now, back to the video. As always, we will kick things off by looking at all of the changes to Melee. For the second week in a row, Frosty K is seeing buffs, this time with a 6% overall damage increase and a 15% buff to Obliterate. On paper, this definitely will make their bursts scarier. However, with increased health pools and lower item levels in the early season, these buffs won't truly be felt until later on. At this point, Death Knight seems to be the worst melee in the game, with Frost slightly edging it out over Unholy. For now, we're going to put Frost on the A tier. Next up is Demon Hunter, who got a class-wide nerf to Glimpse, which now reduces damage taken by 20%. Adding on to this was a nerf to Blur and Desperate Instincts, which will also provide less damage reduction. On the bright side, Havoc did get a complementary damage buff, though combined, these are net nerf overall. We definitely think Havoc is still going to be super competitive across the entire ladder, but might struggle a bit at the high end, especially with buffs to other melee, which we will cover later. For now, we're going to demote Havoc to A+. Moving on, Feral Druid saw some buffs, with Rip and Rake both getting a 15% increase, which is pretty decent, but probably not too game-changing. Feral continues to be one of those specs that is harder to play in solo shuffle, and with 12.1's nerfs to the DR timer, it lost part of its core strength. For now, we're going to put Feral on the A tier. Then we have a mix of buffs and nerfs to Survival, who got a sustained damage increase at the cost of a nerf to Chakram, which is a somewhat cheesy burst spell. Of course, getting your big one-shot nerf does suck, but Survival seems pretty solid so far this season. As long as you play consistent and don't rely exclusively on a single gimmick, you should do just fine. Once again, Survival will remain in the A+ tier. Next up, Windwalker Monk was on the chopping block, getting both a sustained and burst nerf, with Rushing Wind Kick, Rising Sun Kick, and Tiger Eye Brew all getting hit. This will be a tough spec to rank this week, as previously we had them ranked A+ thanks to their impressive damage output. However, with nerfs across the board and buffs to other melee, this could signal a drop in tiers. For now, we're going to be conservative and put Monk in the high A's, but they could remain A+. Moving on to Paladin, we should first note that Prot got a much needed set of utility and defensive nerfs, which should have been done much sooner if we're being honest. And for the second week in a row, Ret is getting some more defensive nerfs, but was compensated by a buff to its tier set and to the Templar hero spec. Despite some doom and gloom, we still think this will be one of the strongest melee in the game. Let's be honest, Ret had more than enough defensive power to begin with, and thanks to a slower meta, defensive nerfs shouldn't be too impactful. For now, we will keep Ret Paladin on the S tier. Next up, we have a set of nerfs to Assassination Rogue, who is getting a hit to their sustained damage and to their Kingsbane coin proc cheese. If you played any arena last week, you probably encountered this spec a ton. They were doing ridiculous damage and basically swarmed the top of the ladder. We still think this will be one of the strongest specs in the game, as its lead was pretty enormous already. For that reason, Assa Rogue will be staying on the S tier. With that said, the Rogue Cartel was able to get a bargain after Outlaw Rogue received some pretty decent buffs to Dispatch and Between the Eyes. We haven't seen much of this spec so far, however, we fully expect Outlaw to have a mini resurgence, especially in the competitive scene with BlizzCon right around the corner. And meanwhile, Sub-Rogue got not only a 10% buff to Eviscerate, but also a 33% buff to its flashy new Gormaw bleed. We expect both Sub and Outlaw to slowly creep up in power over the next few weeks, especially with better gear and tier set bonuses later on. Even though the DR changes hurt the class as a whole, Rogues are proving to be quite resilient and should stay very competitive. Sub will be joining the A+ tier, with Outlaw staying around A for most players. Finally, Blizzard decided to buff Arms Warriors of all things, with both Demolish and Slayer's Strike getting a 15% increase, which were barely offset by some self-healing nerfs. Not much to say here. Arms was already one of the best melee in the game thanks to their insane damage output, and we fully expect their dominant performance to continue with these overall buffs. That brings us to our updated Melee tier list for Season 2, where Brawler Melee are dominating for yet another week in a row. Expect to see lots of Warriors and Ret Paladins in your lobbies, with a mix of rogue specs in between. And by the way, if you need help climbing after this video, be sure to check out our new Solo Shuffle course designed specifically for Melee. But now let's take a look at all the changes to range DPS in the Season 2 meta. First up, Devourer Demon Hunter was hit with some additional defensive nerfs, along with the class-wide nerf to Glimpse, but was compensated by a damage buff to Void Ray. So far, it doesn't seem like Dev has matched its Season 1 success, and with major defensive nerfs at a time where Brawler Melee reigns supreme, this could be a big issue. For now, we're going to put Dev on the A tier. Next up, we have a mix of Marks Hunter tuning with Rapid Fire and Arcane Shot seeing a 15% buff, while Chakram was nerfed by 30% in PvP. Again, this spec hasn't seemed that impressive so far this season. Bigger health pools, the removal of double tap, and a legion of Warriors and Ret Paladins make it harder to succeed this season. By the way, BM Hunter technically got some buffs too, but to talents that don't often see play in PvP. For now, we're going to put Marks Hunter on the A tier. Next up, we have some AUG Evoker changes, and we weren't joking earlier, there are literally less than 50 people playing this spec in both regions combined. Despite this spec being virtually extinct, Blizzard donated a massive 10% damage increase in PvP along with a boost to Ebon Might and Inferno's Blessing. We hate doing this, but due to having almost no play this season, we think AUG is a giant wildcard. With that said, one spec that was definitely not extinct this week was Fire Mage, thanks in part to their Pyroclasm one-shots. This week, Blizzard stepped in and nerfed the talent by 50% in PvP and slapped on some tuning to Molten Fury in the process. They also nerfed a gimmicky Ignite build too in a round of last-minute changes. Despite this, we still think Fire will be one of the best range specs in the game. It is a mage after all, and once again, if you see them hardcasting a Pyroblast, get ready to hold onto your butts. For now, we're keeping Fire on the S tier. This week, Blizzard did some minor tuning, buffing, well, Blizzard, along with some other minor talents. For the meantime, we simply think that Fire will be the better spec, though right now all three versions of Mage are pretty solid, even Arcane, who has had a meteoric rise compared to last season. For now, we will keep Frost in the A+ tier. Next up, Shadow Priest was on the receiving end of some much-needed buffs, with DP, Void Volley, and Death all being buffed by 15%. Unfortunately, we think the meta is just a bit too rough for Shadow Priest. Warriors are the most popular melee by a pretty big margin, and the popularity of Asa Rogues definitely doesn't help either. For now, we still think SP will be one of the worst casters in the game. Up next is Ellie Shaman, who got pretty substantial buffs to Lava Burst and Earth Shock along with a buff to Tempest. Admittedly, this is a spec we probably overranked in week 1. However, as we've mentioned time and time again, Shamans simply have a great toolkit, especially in slower metas. Now with more damage, we see a ton of potential for this spec in Solo Shuffle. We are going to be optimistic here by placing Ellie on the A+ tier. Now as we move on to Warlock, we need to mention a global change. Outside of Felguard, all pet damage was buffed by an astounding 350%. When you see a number this big, you know Blizzard probably messed up somewhere. With that in mind, Affliction got a buff to Agony this week, along with more damage coming from UA Dispel, which makes sense given health pools were massively buffed. Demo, on the other hand, got another wave of buffs, which included buffs to Demon Bolt for the second week in a row, along with some Soul Harvester tuning. Obviously, this is good news, but just like Shadow Priest, we think the meta is a bit rough for this spec overall, not to mention its general class design issues. And finally, Destro Warlock got a buff to Chaos Bolt and Shadow Burn, which, yes, are good. And we will tap the sign once more and remind you that the meta is a bit tough for Warlocks overall. Anyway, these are the updated rankings for range DPS going into week 2. We still think Fire Mages will be solid, while Demo and SP lag a bit behind. Now though, let's wrap things up by looking at all of the major changes to healers. First up is Resto Druid, who, despite being the second or third best healer, got some pretty substantial buffs, with Rejuve, Wild Growth, and Everbloom getting buffed. At least that was the case until Blizzard reverted some of these buffs in PvP. This comes at the top of some bug fixes that happened in the middle of last week, which together signal a really good start for the spec in Season 2. At the high end, we expect this to be one of the best healers in the game, though mid to low tier rated druids still might struggle to adjust to its skill curve. For now, we actually think Resto Druid deserves an S tier ranking. Up next is Holy Paladin, who simply got a 4% nerf to all healing in PvP. Do they really need this? That's debatable. Pally was definitely one of the stronger healers in week 1, finally having enough output to pair with great cooldowns. With massive buffs to Resto Druid, we don't see an argument for Pally being the best healer. So for now, it will remain on the A+ tier. Still solid, but not OP. Now, before we dive into priests, we should mention that Mind Games was globally buffed by 150%. While this number is definitely big, this spell was doing so poorly that this should barely matter. But what does matter are some much needed buffs to Disc Priest, who got an increase to Flash Heal, Shadow Mend, and Atonement Healing. Now, obviously, Holy Priest stole the spotlight this week as a bunch of healers jumped on the Flavor of the Month bandwagon. After these changes and the nerfs to Holy Priest we will cover in a bit, we think Disc will definitely see more play. For now, though, we will be keeping Disc on the A tier. Up next are the nerfs everyone was expecting, with Holy getting a few healing nerfs along with a mana reduction. No king rules forever, as they say. Obviously, this stings for all of you Holy Priest mains, but we still expect the spec to do well going into week 2. Just for some context, Mistweaver Monk was repeatedly nerfed at the start of last season, but still remained the best healer for a while. For now, though, we will be a bit conservative, demoting Holy Priest to A+. Finally, Resto Shaman randomly got nerfs. Don't ask us why, because we really don't know. Shaman definitely wasn't dominating the ladder at all, so this seems weird. With nerfed mana and targeted nerfs to Totemic, it could signal that Farseer is back on the menu. For now, though, this is our ranking for healers going into week 2. The buffs to Resto Druid should be enough to make them the standout healer, with Holy Priest still being quite strong. As far as you Mistweaver mains, we are sorry for your pain. But to make sure that you can hit your goals no matter what, we've got you covered. With over 1,000 videos, our courses are so insanely OP for gaining rating because they're designed to make sure you actually reach your potential. Whether it's positioning, role-specific tips, or guides on how to counter every class, we've got you covered. And now, SkillCap members get full access to the Arena Coach and the #1 UI in PvP, which were built from the ground up to make sure you have a unique advantage over your opponents. And no matter what, we will back you up with a rating gain guarantee where we promise that you will see rating gains while actively using our website. We even offer a 14-day, no questions asked money-back guarantee for those of you who just want to try us out. So after this video, be sure to click the link below for an exclusive discount to get started. For now, we want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.